letting me know. Okay, fabulous. So without further ado, I want to begin today's session. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining me. I am Chantal Senya, but I won't waste any of your time. I'm going to continue ahead with what we've got planned. But as you see on the board here, the title of today's session is the third installment of our Critical Conversation series, and it is titled Critical Conversations, How Do We Commemorate and Collectivise Change? And we are joined by two amazing speakers who I'll introduce you to very, very shortly. So for those, we'll have a Q&A section at the end of this session, but the number, if you could scan the screen, if that works for you on wherever you are, or if you enter the numbers 242-1519 on slido.com, you'll be able to submit all your questions, concerns, worries there. Just to caveat as well, if anyone in the session needs any extra support or would like to chat privately, again, please feel free to flag me through the Q&A section there. And yeah, hopefully that should be able to work for you all. So, I'm your host, Chantal Senya, and for those who are new to the space, either at MHFA or who are just joining us for the first time, I am MHFA England's Diversity and Inclusion Specialist, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'll be chairing discussion and, of course, feeding into what we've got lined up for you today. Now, we've got two amazing speakers who are joining us this afternoon. So as you'll see on the screen here, we've got Kadra Abdinasir, who is the Associate Director for Children and Youth at Centre for Mental Health. In terms of Kadra's expertise, she leads the Centre's research and policy in this area to improve the lives of children and young people. She's also the strategic lead for the Children and Young People's Mental Health Coalition and for a network of over 260 organisations. Kadra has over a decade of experience in working with young people and specialising in youth policy, research and engagement. And she is a youth board member at the mental health charity Beyond, a trustee for Forward UK, Race on the Agenda, Mental Health Collective and a fellow of the RSA. Kadra is also an organiser of #CharitySoWhite, a grassroots group seeking to eradicate racism in the charity sector. On top of that as well, we then have Matt Alexander, who's been involved in professional football and IT all of his life, from being the CEO of Notts County FC to a career in digital information security. He is known as a well-connected, calm and intelligent leader. Now, Matt's father is the late and great Keith Alexander, who was the UK's first Black professional football manager. So again, just to set the scene for all of you in this space, you are in for a great treat. We've got a great selection and variety of expertise across the board. But without further ado, before we begin, I want to give you a little bit of an insight into MHFA England. Now, for those who are new to MHFA England is a social enterprise, and we specialise in evidence-based training to, of course, improve mental health skills, knowledge and confidence around mental health, to eradicate the stigma that comes around mental health, and particularly around the way that we value the importance of physical health as well. Now, we are a globally recognised training provider with over 15 years of experience in our training, which of course has an average increased confidence rate of over 69.4%. Now, we have an amazing instructor member network of over 2,000 instructor members across England from various backgrounds, races and ages, and we are proud to say that we have trained over 500,000 people in mental health first aid in England. Now, our mission is to train 1 in 10 people in the UK in mental health first aid, and our vision is to improve the mental health of the nation. Now, talking a little bit more about our race equity statement and commitments at MHFA England. MHFA England is exclusively an anti-racist social enterprise, but that journey came about in 2020. Now, in 2020, MHFA England released a statement of intent in response to the murder of George Floyd. Now, this commitment outlined 15 key objectives and commitments that we would do as an organisation to ensure that, again, we are eradicating racism through our community, our training, our social purpose, and our campaigning, the 4 key elements that we identified as the ways in which we can ensure substantial impact in that area. Now, what you can see on the screen here is our My Whole Self campaign, which is what our race equity work sits under, our large campaign, which of course encourages workplaces to support employees, ensuring that they can bring their whole self into work to, of course, support their mental health and their mental well-being here. What you see on the board here as well is including our race equity impact reports, and again, further guidance on what we've done as an organisation to support the well-being and mental health of Black people and people of colour in the workplace. Now, of course, as continued from our My Whole Self campaign, we want to inspire organisations to create equitable and anti-racist workplaces to drive cultural and systemic change within the mental health landscape. Now, of course, this supports our mission and vision in bettering the mental health of the nation, and of course ensuring that even though anti-racism is a continuous journey, we want to achieve long, substantial social impact in looking after ourselves and others. Now, MHFA England has a zero tolerance stance on non-inclusive behaviours in which we never walk on by on behaviours such as racism, harassment and discrimination and the like as well. And some of our work in terms of if you yourself would like to get involved with MHFA England in terms of how you can inspire yourselves as individuals and your workplaces in anti-racism, you can find out more on our website. But to date, we are able to proudly say that we've launched a zero tolerance and EDI policy. We are now a Race Equality Matters trailblazer, and we've also launched our new MHFA course, which has a renewed perspective on our race equity work, representation, diversity, including that with mental health first aid. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context as to who we are at MHFA England there. Now, what you're here for, Black History Month. So October marks Black History Month in the UK, and it's a month dedicated to celebrating Black history, culture, identity, and contributions to society. Now, Black History Month was introduced in the US by Carter G. Woodson in 1926, originally first as Black History Week, to promote the learning of Black history in school curriculums. Now, in the UK, it's October marks Black History Month to support children as they start the new quarter, to support them in beginning the school year with pride. Now, the journey of Black History Month in the UK is a very interesting one, and the UK first celebrated Black History Month in 1987 with a Ghanaian activist called Achebe Adesabu, who introduced that to the Greater London Council, and that's why I guess we are here today in present day in 2022. Now, why do we have Black History Month? Now, we have Black History Month because, as we know and as we see in day-to-day interactions, that history is whitewashed as a result of slavery, colonialism and imperialism, which have dictated the level of representation given to Black people and people of colour. Now, to level that up a little bit, a really good resource, which I've shared thousands of times, but I want to share with you guys today, is Peggy McIntosh's White Privilege. Title is called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And she gives a variety of examples as to the importance of representation and what that means. And a quote that I would like to reference, which is relevant to today, is when I'm told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my colour made it what it is. And of course, Peggy McIntosh was is a white scholar as well. So just to give a bit of context as to why we have Black History Month, why it's important to celebrate and commemorate Black History Month, and of course, the apt title that we have of today's discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because I really want to hear a lot from our speakers today. But Matt, Kadra, what does Black History Month mean to you?
Me personally, I think growing up in a mixed household, I was always really, really conscious of my Black history, but the heritage, my family in the West Indies, when they came over here, the impact that they had on British society when they came over here. And my mum, who's obviously not Black, is from, she was always really, really eager for us to understand the history behind our family. And I think that made a real big difference to the way that we were brought up. I don't think many people had that privilege of being brought up like that. And I think a lot of mixed race people especially will be able to understand that when your white mum decides that she's going to make chicken and plantain, it doesn't necessarily taste the same.
Thank you for sharing that, Matt. Kadra, what does Black History Month mean to you?
I love that. Thank you. I guess what Black History Month means to me has been changing over time. As you kind of like set out in your intro, when I was younger, it was a lot about like awareness raising, acknowledgement of Black people's like contributions in the UK. But I think more recently, it's probably the conversations have been evolving. For example, if you even take like Black British identity, like what is that? There's so many like unique groups and experiences that sit underneath that. Like we're not a monolith. For example, like this week is Somali week, and that's like focusing specifically on like you know, Somali people's experiences in the UK. So I think, you know, different communities have also made different contributions within the UK. And I think we're starting to learn a bit more about that. I think also it's important to say, and something that I've seen like a trend over the last sort of like decade or so, it's like not just like highlighting struggles, but also like having this desire to like celebrate like Black progress and achievement. And also more recently, like around Black joy, and just having fun, really. And I think, you know, like this year's theme's quite interesting because there is also this push towards like action, not just like having events and like talking shops, essentially. But there still like seems to be like a lot of performative activities, unfortunately, that happen. Like I was speaking to my friend, and in her company for Black History Month, they said, okay, all the Black people in the organization will chair and organize meetings. And it's like, great, you're giving us more work. Like you think you're doing something good, but you're actually giving us more work. So I mean, like ultimately it's a month to really like shine a spotlight on Black people's experiences, but it shouldn't be the only time of year, obviously, that we discuss Black issues, because, you know, we're here for the other 11 months too.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing, Kadra. And again, you mentioned very nicely as well, the actions, not words, because the theme in the UK for Black History Month this month is action, not words. And of course, we'll be able to dive into that a little bit later on today's session. But I think in particular with, you know, social discourse at the moment, with race relations especially, I think it's very apt coming from 2020, where we did the listening and learning. We're now in a place where, you know, 2022, what does action and words, you know, look like? And again, to mention what you caveated about trauma, again, in looking at the representation that Black people face quite a lot of time, I've noticed that with Black History Month, unfortunately, aside from, you know, my education, Black History Month has usually been Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and that's about it, or the trauma that's been associated with the civil rights movement. And again, I think if we're able to break away from the trauma that you know, that is, I guess, unfortunately synonymous with Blackness, then we're able to, of course, you know, pioneer forward and, I guess, widen discussion, really. But yeah, thank you, Kadra and Matt, for sharing that. Now, to dive into today's topic, really, in looking at collectivization and in, you know, looking at what change really, really looks like in both of your personal experiences. Matt, I'm going to come back to you. In your navigation of your identity, you mentioned, you know, your dual heritage. Have you had anyone, you know, project any societal racist stereotypes and expectations upon you? And how did that affect you? Did you challenge it? Yeah, what did you do?
Yeah. I think that's been since the day I was born, to be really honest with you. From a child, you know, going into I was born in a mainly white area, and as a child going into shops and stuff, getting followed, to a teenager, as I mentioned when we spoke a while ago about a teenager trying to find his identity, not having my ethnicity on a form for me to fill in, to an adult being, you know, driving down the road and having being stopped by the police and all of those sort of things. I think I've had it throughout my life, and it's if I'm really honest, it's not since the last maybe 10 years that I've looked back on it and gone, you know what, that was wrong. This was wrong. This is affecting me now as a human and as an adult and all those different things. So I think anybody that is in this country as a Black mixed race person, I think they will all have some sort of experience as to when we've been, you know, maybe pigeonholed into a certain group, and you know, you find it now, you know, it's just I remember my dad, he used to he he drummed something into my head from a young age, and I never understood why. And he always said, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me." And he told me that every day of the week. And it's not until I got to this age where I realized what you're trying to do as a father is you're trying to prepare your child that, you know, you're going to get called some names at some point through your life, and you know, you can't allow them to hurt you, you know. So I think yeah, absolutely, it's been throughout my life, I have come up against many different obstacles, many different experiences that were not positive, let's put it like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
And I'm a 6'5", 18 stone.
Wow.
I don't really blend in anywhere. So, you know, it's not like I can just I can just blend in the background.
Yeah, but no, thank you for sharing that, Matt. And even you describing your experiences, there's certain aspects where I can relate to too, having to be irritated and trying to maintain my language here, but having been irritated at people, you know, following you around the store, and stuff like that as well. And you mentioned the sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I think that's one way that I like to look at, you know, empowering myself, because again, racism operates in a power dynamic. And if you're able to look at it and say, you know what, I'm going to make sure that as a Black person, even though societally I'm, you know, I'm marginalized, I'm going to make sure that in the best way that I can, that, you know, I'm not going to allow you to affect me. I'm not going to give you any more power than you think you have in doing that. But in saying that, you know, aside from the sticks and stones may break my bones, like, how do you actively challenge that? Because of course you've referenced that you don't really, you know, you're 6'5", you know, yeah, how do you do that in your day to day?
I didn't understand how important that saying statement is, how important it would be throughout my life, to be honest. From hearing it daily, you know, every time I saw my dad, he would say the same thing, you know, going to school, just remember sticks and stones. And I didn't understand how it could affect me, because, you know, you go to school. I went to a grammar school. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't an easy schooling. There were words said and statements said that, you know, don't worry, Matty, it's not you. You know, that sort of stuff. So I think growing up with that pretty much daily, it does have an effect on your life, and it does, you know, it does alter the way you see things in adulthood. But that being said, with the underlying sticks and stones will break my bones, I really feel like that helped me maybe compartmentalize some of the words that were saying to me. You know, you can say anything, but it's not really going to affect me massively until maybe later on in life. And I think it was all, for me, it was all about getting through the day-to-day words. I think that was the thing. Even some of the adults, you know, you would find where we lived, you would find that even adults would say things to children, you know, you're like 10, 11 years old and being called names that you don't understand. So I think it's important to understand and celebrate what Black people have done in this country, and how, you know, my gran, for instance, my granny came over from St. Lucia. She was a psychiatric nurse, all of that. She you know, had a massive effect on people's lives. And I think, as much as I look back sometimes, and, you know, and I think about the things that were done to me and said to me, it's all eclipsed by how I see my gran's journey to the UK and the impact she had on the UK. And my dad's as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for that, Matt. Kadra, I want to come straight to you. Your thoughts, your experiences, same question, please.
Thanks, Chantal. Do you know what is quite interesting? My experience was maybe the opposite to Matt's, because like I grew up in an extremely sort of like diverse area, and my school's primary and secondary school probably was like predominantly Black, actually. So I didn't really think about race much growing up. You know, I even had a best friend who was like a Kosovan refugee, and it's just like nobody really, like, we were all just like a bag of Skittles in a way. And it wasn't really until like I was like fully conscious and aware of like what it means to be Black until I went to university and into the world of work. And then I just saw like a lot more sort of like segregation and people staying within their sort of groups and communities. And then, then I reflect back and think about, actually, even if you are in a predominantly Black institution or school, you're still impacted in some ways by stereotypes. Like most of the teachers majority of the teachers were still white. Some of the way they would speak to the students and handle issues wasn't right. But in terms of like just my identity, I think sometimes it's a bit difficult to like gauge like what aspect people might be stereotyping me for, being a Black woman, but also being from like a Muslim community. Obviously there's like, it's really interesting because there's like that intersection of like anti-Blackness, but also Islamophobia that you have to deal with. And like dealing with a group, like being a Black woman, the stereotypes linked to us is like being loud, aggressive, but then at the same time, Muslim women are seen and stereotyped as being silent. It's just weird, like being in the middle of that. And sometimes it's like tough to like navigate, but I think obviously all these stereotypes, they like end up fueling negative things like imposter syndrome, or not feeling like you belong in this society, or can like be a citizen that contributes just as much as like a white person. But I think like with age and experience, you just have to do a lot of like unlearning and debunking of some of these myths. So I had to like learn over time how to like not internalize the way that society and others see me. You know, it's a them problem, it's not a me problem. And then I guess, just on like how to kind of challenge that, some of these things, it's like using discernment really to like decide when you might need to call somebody in, that it could be a colleague or a friend. Sometimes you have to call people out, unfortunately, because people taking that sort of zero tolerance approach, asking them where their beliefs and ideas come from, for example, if it's safe to do so, obviously. And then, you know, just having a really strong sort of like support network around you and other sort of like friends and colleagues who can show that solidarity. So it's not always on you to like challenge things. I think that helps massively.
No, 100%. And thank you for that as well, Kadra. What you mentioned as well in terms of intersectionality that I wanted to sort of bring out into the wider space for everyone to sort of hear is that you mentioned being a Muslim woman and a Black woman, and intersectionality, for those who don't know, I feel like it's a big word that's been used since 2020, so everyone should have heard it in some capacity. But from scholar Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, essentially looks at how multiple systems of oppression overlap and work, impacting one's experience of the world. So Kadra, in her own personal life experience, has shared how that, Islamophobia and racism have worked, and sexism all work as an intersect to, again, as a systemic thing to try and limit what Kadra does, in terms of, Matt's, essence with intersectionality as well, with his dual heritage, in terms of his experience, as well as that, how that influences and how that impacts. So again, not only is he dealing with racism, but it's also dealing with other aspects of society as well that are trying to hinder and that, try and oppress people as a large society. Myself as a Black bisexual woman, I'm not only subjected to misogynoir or sexism, I'm also subjected to anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric, but also racism as well. So it's looking at, it's having that, well, when you're placed in a marginalized community, I feel like there's that level of awareness that you have to have. I don't know about yourself, Matt, where you're having to be hyper aware of who you are and how you interact with others and how that plays back to you in that space as well. So thank you for bringing that out in this space, because I thought it was really interesting as you were talking to me. And in terms of the element of community and making sure that, having that solidarity and calling out behaviours such as, racism, such as sexism, such as Islamophobia, such as all the isms that can be, really. And I think that's a really important aspect to draw away from today's discussion, because a lot of the time when you're calling out racism and other negative behaviours, it's placed on those who have the emotional labour. So more times than likely, people expect the Black person to step up and say, well, of course, but to say, so and so, whereas, okay, that shouldn't be the case. It should be a community effort. We are a community, so we need to act like it. Sounds cliche, but it's just the reality of the situation. So segueing into that, actually, I wanted to draw upon what you mentioned, Kadra, about growing up and your upbringing as well. And again, we often say, children are the future, and of course, how you grew up and especially Matt as well, how you both grew up is how it's affected your outlook into the world. So we often say children are the future. Do you think that we invest enough care, support and access to Black children?
In short, no.
Okay.
But I guess, children's mental health in this country, like and the support services available to them is often like described as the Cinderella of Cinderella services, because mental health itself is like not as prioritized as like physical health in society. And then children are just the group that are sort of overlooked, you know, in general. I think, you know, they make up about, like, spending wise, like just 1% of the NHS budget, which is shocking. But we know that 3/4 of mental health problems develop in childhood and adolescence. So it's like a no-brainer if we supported young people on the whole a bit more. But then if you think about, obviously, Black children and young people from racialized backgrounds, they're even, you know, further sort of like face further sort of inequalities in that space. And there are, you know, like we often talk about like racial inequalities and adults and within the mental health system, but it's really like stark, the inequalities that children face. For example, some data that was leaked in The Independent earlier this year showed that Black children made up 36% of those detained in mental health hospitals, but just 5% of those accessing community services. So why are they like so overrepresented on that more, you know, serious end of the scale? So like at the center, we've been trying to like investigate this a bit more because the research base is in itself underdeveloped. So, you know, we're really prioritizing that as an organization to like learn more about what's driving some of these differences. And then one example of a program we're running with UK Youth and the Diana Award is called Young Changemakers. And this is about really like centering young Black people across the country in reimagining mental health support for them. Because one thing we hear is that like their voices are just missing from decision-making rooms. So through this project, like, you know, we've equipped young people with tools to like create their own campaigns to tell us what's important to them. So they've, for example, they've said to us, dealing with racial microaggressions in school is something that impacts their mental health. Another group like set up a podcast because they want to, you know, initiate conversations with other young people around mental health to tackle stigma. So I really think we need to do more to really amplify the views and experiences of young Black people in this country, and just do more overall in investing in services.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Kadra. Before I jump in, Matt, did you have any additional thoughts as well with what's been shared?
I'll be honest, I couldn't have put it any better than Kadra's put it. I think it's absolutely spot on with everything that she says there. And obviously, I don't have a massive understanding of the background that goes into her work and you know, things like that, and NHS budgets and stuff like that. But from I can say from a football point of view, you know, we look at, we used to, obviously it said I was a CEO of Notts County, but by the way, ex-CEO. Yeah, we, you know, football's always been a bit of a different market because, you know, black mixed race players and people from all over the world are revered, and we you know, we'll always bring players into it. It doesn't matter how good you've got to be good, you know, it doesn't matter who you are as long as you're really good. So I don't think there's a massive amount of support. There definitely wasn't when I was growing up. You know, if I had somebody that I could, you know, maybe relate to or speak to, or, you know, somebody like myself, to be honest, you know, if there was somebody out there like myself that I could really open up to. And I think this is another thing going into opening up, counselling and things like that. I think that we in the Black community as well, we maybe don't what's the word? We don't give it as much credence as it should have. You know, everybody, I believe. I mean, I've seen a counsellor before in my life, and I spent years doing that, and I think it was one of the best things I ever did in my life. So I think we don't put as much emphasis on helping young kids to be open, to be a little bit more open with how they're feeling. And I think if we could do that to, you know, the Black community, the young kids in the Black community, the more open they'll be, the better they will feel. And I think in the long run, when they move into adulthood, give them the tools to be able to deal with certain things a lot better as well. So just like Kadra says, if you get to that point where you're helping the young kids, which, you know, I think what she said there was, it's well known that if you help children, mental health issues stem from that point. If you can help them to open themselves up and to speak a little more about their feelings, then I think that will have a massive effect moving on into adulthood.
Most definitely. And again, both really great points from the both of you. And on top of that, thinking about, the disproportionate exclusion rates that we see with Black children. And there's that element, and I want to really come away from this element of, intergenerational trauma, children seeing the effects of racism growing up on, their trusted adults, their family, their friends, and, having to learn from a young age that, racism exists. It's a reality that they're going to have to face in their world. And again, that breeds a level of distrust, which we see in the Black community in, towards, specific institutions like the police, like the NHS, when it comes to healthcare and accessing healthcare as well. So it's so many aspects that I think, definitely need to be recognised within the Black community. But I think in a weird way, on the flip side, allow us as a community to, I guess, collectivise. I think that's why, despite so many societal hindrances and issues, that I'm so proud to say I'm Black. Like, I will shout it from the rooftops. I am so proud to say that, but I'm so proud to say that I'm Black, part of the community that, despite all the challenges, has a level of understanding like we have in the space. We all have different experiences, as we both shared and identified, but we're all able to identify and come together and say, at least we still have each other. At least we're still able to strategize and think about how we can support each other and how we can look forward to the generations to come as well. So moving on from that really swiftly, actually, I wanted to touch upon the role of culture actually within the Black community. In specific measures, I wanted to look at, what you think of the impact of, pop culture, society, and how that affects the Black community. So, for instance, I'm sure, those of us that are in the space have seen the news in regards to a particular celebrity. I'm going to try and be really careful just in case, but a particular celebrity that's been making a lot of not only anti-Semitic statements, but a lot of anti-Black statements, and themselves being a part of the Black community, which in very plain terms is, I would say, really harmful towards the Black community, because even though the person is a black prolific celebrity, they're perpetuating white supremacy, which of course encourages other people to, to say, okay, this person's Black. If they're saying this, there must be validity in what they're saying. But of course, within the Black community, there's been a lot of discussion around this individual, and a lot of, reprimanding, a lot of warning. And I just wanted to sort of come back to the both of you and say, what have been your thoughts in terms of how big of a role pop culture plays in culture within the Black community?
Well, I think pop culture, especially, I spoke about this a little bit earlier. The effect that the culture, my West Indian culture has had on my life, especially the music, the food, everything around it has sculpted my life in a certain way. And I was lucky enough to I went out to live in the West Indies, so I saw it from my own, from a first point of view. And I feel like when it comes to pop culture, when it comes to everything, the food again, it's only positive things that it brings to the UK. I think even with my daughter, she loves all of the reggae music. She loves all of it. We go to our favorite food place every now and again, and although the welcome could be a lot better when it comes to West Indian takeaway. I think, as we all know, I think the food and the culture is just fantastic. And I think with regards to the celebrity you're talking about, I find it really harmful. I'm not going to mince my words. I think you've only got to look at some of the big brands recently that have moved away from him. Adidas in particular. That for me is a great move. Is it too late? Was it a bit late? Possibly.
Yes.
You know what? Late's better than never. And I think that I think from my own personal point of view, I don't understand it. It's obviously something that he's struggling with on a different level. But I don't understand how you can make these comments knowing that you're in the public eye and millions of children around the world are watching you and expecting you to be a role model in certain ways. So I found that quite saddening, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for even it was really it's been nice to see how you lit up when you're talking about the impact of West Indian culture.
Absolutely. Even in my small, the small town I grew up in. I mean, I haven't lived there for many years now, but You know, I've lived in cities, I've lived all over the world, so to speak, and my culture comes with me everywhere. I'm lucky, you know, I have West Indian culture, and I have, my mum's half Italian, so I have a bit of a mixture. And I think that I love the feel that I mean, back in the day when I was a kid, you know, you just wanted to fit in everywhere, you know, that's just what, I was never going to fit in. But now, as an adult, I look back on the culture that you know, my grandparents have some cases forced upon me. I think it's only a good thing, you know, and I'll tell everybody about it. You know, I take people, some of my friends who are from around here, obviously white guys and stuff like that. We all go to our favorite West Indian restaurant, and I introduce everybody to our food. And I think once you get that feel of that, that feel of West Indian culture, man, I don't think you can beat it personally. I think it just warms your soul.
Definitely. And I think, especially when you referenced that, my mind went straight to Carnival as well. Nottingham Carnival, that returned for what, over a 2-year hiatus back this year. And again, seeing that variety, seeing that life, and just, it's an amazing culture. And again, you know, being part of the diaspora, I just thought it was amazing. But I'm going to quickly pop over to yourself, Kadra, and just, get your viewpoint on the impact of said rhetoric within the Black community. And again, what role that plays, you know, in the Black community with culture.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because we're still, you know, fighting to get representation of the Black community within the UK, within pop culture. I still, like, all the examples we've, like, well, not all of them, the said person we're talking about, that's over there in America. And, you know, we're seeing like so many talented, like, Black actors and actresses moving from the UK to the US because they're just, there's nowhere for them to sort of like fit into any of these like British sitcoms and series that we have over here. So that's a problem in itself. We've got a bit of like a talent drain where our representation as Black Brits can only sort of be realized over in America rather than within our own country. So I think, you know, it's quite interesting, but in many ways it like reflects society, doesn't it? That we're still sort of like impacted by racism. And I think like in the sort of last decade or so, there's been like a drive for pop culture on a whole, like to kind of look at how that intersects with activism, looking at like music, art, fashion, all those kind of places. And, you know, sometimes people can get it right and get really powerful messages across, but as we've seen with this example, things can go horribly wrong. But I think with said individual, you know, there's a lot of like nuance around it, and like there's very like binary thinking in the response to it, from my perspective. So I think obviously within the Black community, we need to have our own conversations about like anti-Semitism and these things that happen, and also there are people that are both Black and Jewish, so it's not two distinct separate groups, which I just think is ridiculous. There's like millions of Black Jews around the world too. So it's about how we can kind of have accountable conversations around how white supremacy impacts us all, no matter what community we're from. But obviously the said person was allowed to also go unchecked with his like anti-Black remarks because he is a Black person, you know, all the horrible stuff he was saying about George Floyd's incident, and just the slave trade being a good thing, all that kind of ridiculous stuff. It was a bit jarring for me to kind of see that not go challenged on any of these platforms, which makes it seem like it's fine to kind of like perpetuate anti-Black racism. That's just unfortunately the message. But on the whole, I think with COVID, we've kind of seen a bit of a decline in pop culture in some ways. I feel like with social media, people want more relatable content. And like, especially from young people's like perspective, like the power of TikTok is just
social media is powerful.
Like lots of young Black people are making it big there. Like I forgot the young man's name, but he's got like 1 billion followers and he's just having a huge impact and influence. So I think I don't want to say like death of a celebrity, but in a way it is, because a lot of them have been behaving very badly and during COVID haven't really demonstrated any sensitivities around everything, you know, that we're dealing with in the world today. So we're at this really interesting time where things are evolving still, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting time. And interesting you say that as well, because there's also another conversation to be had around this individual when it comes to mental health as well, because they've been very vocal in their mental health journey. And as we've already discussed in this space already, that there is a certain level of distrust within the Black community towards healthcare and mental health because of institutional racism and how that has played out in terms of access to treatment, overrepresentation in certain mental health disorders, and the like as well. And I think in having, as you said, like it's such a split in the type of conversations we have within the community in terms of holding this individual accountable in terms of their anti-Black rhetoric, but also ensuring that people are aware of why we're making the noise about said things, and ensuring that, again, with those who are growing up, the children that are going to be seeing this and moving on throughout society, with the media that they produce, because again, with intersectionality, there's another issue, there's class. This person is wealthy. So there's certain aspects and levels that we ourselves as people within our own tax brackets may not be able to access in that regard. So there's so many little nuances in that piece, in that space, really. But yeah, thank you for that. I want to sort of take this question actually and move into, gesture politics. We talk about accountability, and I think moving into ways that we can, I guess, not only garner accountability within the Black community, but also in society, and ensuring that, again, we're eradicating and dismantling racism. So, Matt, I have a question for you. So, with taking the knee is often, synonymous with gesture politics if there's nothing really substantiating that. But of course, with that, the gesture, taking the knee, being synonymous with football, do you think that this is a substantial impact or substantial thing in challenging racism in this particular industry?
I think anything that gets people discussing it is a good thing. And by taking the knee, I think what it does is, whether you're for it or against it, I don't know why you'd be against it, to be honest with you. I think what it does is it starts a conversation. And I think when you're discussing things like racism, especially in football, everything starts from that conversation. I think it's done great for, it's made people aware of things that are happening. I think it's created discussions on the terraces, in the offices. Some people like it, some people dislike it. I like it. I think the more that we can show awareness to the issue, I think the better. So yeah, I think it's had a real positive impact, and I think it will continue to have a positive impact whilst people are discussing it.
Thank you, Matt. Kadra, from an outside perspective, what do you think about the impact of taking the knee, for example, in the industry of football?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with exactly everything Matt has just said. I guess for me, we still need to see a bit more of like a concerted effort from the FA and the institutions themselves in terms of taking accountability. Like, it's not just, the onus isn't just on like fans and on players themselves. So just really thinking about a bit more about their responsibility and their response to certain things. Like we saw, like after the World Cup, the abuse that 3 Black young football players faced, and what are the clubs doing in terms of offering that emotional support and protection? So I think there's still more work really to be done, but I'm not a football expert by no means, but I think just like every other institution, really, they're kind of they've got the same sort of challenges around that.
Of course, thank you both. And again, you've both referenced that in talking about taking the knee. Again, the fact that it's a talking point and people know what it is already a very good thing in itself. And yeah, I definitely agree that, again, it's a people thing. We need to be able to collectivise and continue acts like this, but it's the institutions that we want to really nail and make sure that they understand the impact of said things as well. And I believe over the last, I think not this weekend, the weekend before, there was a footballer who had shared the Instagram profile of someone who had sent them some racist abuse, and there was immediately an onslaught of added abuse to this football player, saying, you've ruined this person's life, why would you post their details online? And the footballer came back and was like, well, what do you expect me to do with that information, and trying to hold that individual accountable. And I believe as well, in terms of I know there's other football campaigns, Matt, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, on taking a stand against racism. I believe there's an actual show racism, the red card. That's one campaign that's going on. So yeah, I think it's interesting. There's so many talking points around that. So yeah, but before we head on to the Q&A, I think we've spoken about several assets of collectivization and several aspects of the Black community. But I want to really nail the real question here. I said that every time, but the proper question, the big question. So now between 2020 and 2022, like I said before, we've had listening and learning. We're now UK Black History Month, action, not words. Now, of course, we have seen, everybody has seen in some capacity and has heard of the various acts of violence against the Black community. And I'm referencing George Floyd in the UK and not in the UK, in the US, and Chris Kadra in the UK. For those, again, I think everyone may be aware of this now, but Chris Kadra was shot by police on the 5th of September after onslaught of protests and back and forth with the Metropolitan Police and challenging said rhetoric. At the time of his death, it was mentioned that he was being chased. There was a high-speed chase, but weeks later it was found out that in fact there wasn't a chase, that Chris Kadra was followed, and in short, his death was unnecessary, really. So in looking at that, the 2-year difference in between, and again, a similar story, death in police custody, death by a particular institution, has anything changed?
I suppose I'm going to get the first, aren't I, Kadra? I don't know. I mean, it's a really tough one because, as I said before, I'm not somebody that stays up to date with news. I don't read the news. I don't watch the news. I try my hardest to stay away from all negativity because life's difficult enough as it is. But
it's triggering.
But with stuff like this, it's very difficult to keep away from stuff like this because it does have such an impact. Yeah. I think the George Floyd and the Chris Kadra incidences are both terrible. You know, nobody should lose their life for nothing. You know, let's get that right. You know, if there's a way that they shouldn't lose their life and they don't deserve to lose their life, then they shouldn't lose it. And I think that's something that we all have to really, despite all of the protests and everything, get back to basics. You know, these are human beings at the end of the day. No matter what they've done in the past, no matter what they're doing right now, if you don't have to kill somebody, you shouldn't kill them. It's as simple as that. And I think that I think the answer to the question, from my point of view, is I can't see that much has really changed. You know, I mean, do I feel safe when I'm, you know, if I was to be in police custody? I'll probably feel as safe as I did years ago. You know, I'm not going to lie. I was arrested years ago when I was a kid, and I didn't feel safe then, and I probably wouldn't feel safe now. So from my point of view, no, I don't think much has changed massively. Do I think there's a different? I think there's a different outlook these days because we have social media, we have a lot of things that keeps us connected 24/7. So I think, unfortunately, with that comes people's opinions can be pushed onto other people, and negative opinions about what, you know, maybe Chris was doing or what George was doing, or all this sort of stuff can be pushed around. And the amount of fake news and things these days, you know, you just don't know what's real and what isn't. So I think our awareness of this sort of stuff, yeah, absolutely, it's got better. And I think the way that we deal with something when it happens is a lot better. Should it happen? Absolutely not. Will it happen in the future? Probably will again, to be honest, at some point. And the scary thing is, you know, how many times does this have to happen before, you know, people go, you know, enough's enough. And that's the worrying thing for me, because, you know, I didn't really, I wasn't, obviously me, Kadra and I, we were brought up in different areas of the UK. Yeah. My area being predominantly white, Kadra's being predominantly black. Yeah. But I still feel like we'd have the same feeling if we were both arrested, you know, so you know, it doesn't really matter where in the UK you are, there's still that worry. But, you know, moving forward, we can only be positive about these things, and hopefully, you know, the powers that be will take on people's protest, they'll take on people's advice on how to deal with and how to work with the Black community a little bit better. And that's all I can hope for, you know.
Definitely. Thank you, Matt, and thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned two aspects which stuck out to me in regards to, you know, talking about criminal past. And again, in the same aspect that we've referenced with George Floyd, in his death, a lot of people came up and was saying a lot of things about his past and previous addictions, as if that was a justification for his death in police custody. And with Chris Kadra in the news, we've seen a lot of narrative about what may have been his past, but again, that is not a justification.
It's irrelevant. And I think also, you look at the George Floyd incident. This guy had his knee on his neck for I don't know how many minutes. You don't need to do that to anybody for that long. Let's be right about this. There's a reason the guy's in prison now, and I think that it did have an impact on a lot of people in this country as much as it did in the UK.
It did. It definitely did. It definitely did. And what you referenced as well about the power of people. Again, it's a repetitive theme that I'm sure all of you have heard for the past hour now, but it really is down to the power of people, because again, as the story of Chris Kadra holding the particular officer and institution accountable in Chris Kadra's murder, there was some news that came out, I believe, around a month ago, where the police issued a statement saying that they were no longer going to record the ethnicities of the drivers that they stopped. And again, through the power of people, through the power of social media and protest, that decision was reversed in about 24 hours, I believe. And they said, okay, we're going to continue doing that as such. But again, it shows that, institutions that are, or people, in fact, you can take it in a general sense, institutions and people that are exerting racism are fully aware of the power of that, are fully aware of the impact of what they do. And it's not only until people in our volume can actually say and talk and collectivise and say that's not right, that change can really happen. Kadra, I'd like to get your thoughts, please.
Yeah, no, I really echo what you both just said there, like spot on. And, I think like for me, one of the things that I find quite striking is like, this essentially is like those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So how we kind of saw the George Floyd incident was very different to how we saw Chris Kadra. And like when it happens within our own backyard, we feel like it's something that just happens over there in America. But there's been numerous incidents since George Floyd involving Black men in the UK, Chris Kadra being the latest one in terms of his encounter with the police. I think I kind of agree, like there's been quite a lot of like collective outrage and little change. We need like much more kind of sophisticated conversations, especially around policing and mental health. Like lots of individuals who present in mental health crises, especially Black men, are still like, the response from police is just, disgraceful really. And all of these instances, unfortunately, it just feels mistrust between the Black community and police, like they should be there to serve and protect. But we've all said here in this conversation, none of us feel like they would protect us if we came into contact with them, which is telling. And I think, we just also need to like move on from having all these investigations that reach the same conclusion. I think there was another report about the Met Police and how rife like racism and sexism is within the police force. It's not good enough. We had a similar report like 20, 30 years ago, like what is changing. So I think from my perspective, it's great that, as a community, we're connecting with each other to kind of like be more demanding and challenging some of the decision making. But there's a real sort of like lack of acceptance that this is an issue within the UK, and that in itself kind of like prevents us from taking any action. So we need like sort of clearer leadership and political will around this. If we have a government that doesn't believe racism is an issue, and on the other hand, they actually want to increase the numbers of police on the streets, that is like a recipe for, because I even saw, I think, if you look at young people in custody, the rates for that have been going down steadily. But now, because of a lot of the changes to police and legislation in this country, the numbers of children in custody will more than double in the next 3 years, which is like, it's sort of like we're going backwards on some of these things. So,
my goodness.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. But there's nothing else that I really can add to that. Really, it's a wider conversation that needs to be had. It's also acknowledging, because I think when George Floyd happened, there was a lot of, well, it doesn't happen in the UK. Then Chris Kadra happened and people were either silent or had a lot to say about Chris Kadra's past, which again, like we've already said, isn't really relevant. But again, as the whole story and situation unfolds, I can only hope that again, you know, Chris Kadra's family have the support that they need, and that again, appropriate action and accountability is taken into account, really. Now, I want to end on a higher and better note. We've been talking about a heavy subject just then, but for yourselves, in terms of, you know, what your thoughts, feelings are, and for the people that are listening in, what does action, not words, look like in our day-to-day roles? How can we actively, positively, you know, collectivise change?
From my point of view, I think it's going back to the culture question again, the culture side of it. I feel like I can actively affect the people around me by introducing them to my culture and introducing them to the good things that you know, my family have brought to this country. I think because of my dad's involvement in football, I've had a pretty easy run when it comes to football. It's never been a difficult thing for me to be involved in that sport. But I think there's so much, even now, you know, it's so much we can that our families, our culture can bring to this country that is vibrant, and it's exciting. And I think that's how I've always done it anyway, and how I expect to keep doing it, and introduce people to my way of when I grew up. I have obviously I have my gran and granddad in the UK as well, who were you know, your typical small town people, but they are. I put something on LinkedIn yesterday, actually. My daughter with my granddad. He's 92 in the garden picking flowers, and you know, these were people that when my mum came home with my dad, you know, it would not have been something that that they would have expected. I would have thought, you know, my dad being a 6'5" West Indian guy coming into a small town. But my dad, I remember him saying to me, and this is the story I tell a lot of my friends, you know, my dad always told me that my gran and granddad opened their doors to him with you know, open arms, and brought him in as part of their family straight away, without any kind of stigma, without anything attached. You know, my dad was welcomed into the family, and I think that's something that a lot of people need to hear, you know, and I think the more of those stories that we hear, the better it can only be for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Matt. And it's just amazing that you have that wonderful family network, and that you have that experience, really, even for your daughter growing up. It's generational, I guess, blessing, I think, is the better way to put it.
Absolutely.
You've been lucky enough to have that growing up as well. Thank you, Matt. Kadra, what does action, not words, look like in our day-to-day roles?
So I guess I would say, you know, everyone sort of has to critically assess this for themselves and for their settings that they're in, because the actions that people can take will look different in different settings. So like, you need to kind of prioritize your own journey. This is like a lifelong journey. It's not like a tick box. There's not a course you can go and take and all of a sudden like you're an anti-racist. So we constantly have to like find ways of applying that anti-racist lens in our lives. You know, one example might be thinking about like ways that as a white person, how you might be able to like give up space. For example, at Centre for Mental Health, we've got a policy where we don't contribute to all white male panels, for example. So we kind of like encourage event planners to like rethink their sort of like processes in that sense. I know you said listen and learn earlier, but there's still so much more to like listen and learn. And there's like so many amazing like books and podcasts, and you know, even like a collective called No White Saviors, for example. They do some really groundbreaking like events and conversations, and they've got one coming up on Saturday looking at decolonizing knowledge, for example, like just quite interesting. All this stuff is like free and readily available, so people just really need to dedicate time. And then I guess the last point I would say, and it kind of touches a little bit on what Matt said, just really practicing self-care in this work, because like fighting racism is exhausting and tiring and draining. And like, you know, as part of this work as well, the way that we can build community is through self-care, you know, through looking after our well-being, connecting over food, connecting over travel, all of these things and history.
Wow, thank you for that, Kadra. If you can, if it's possible, I'm more than, if you could just send the link for the No White Saviors event, and I'm more than happy to share that with attendees. But thank you for that. Everything that you both have shared is essentially what action, not words, looks like. But again, What would I add to this space? I would say for those within the Black community, I think garnering solidarity. So finding your nearest, I say sibling in the generalized sense, collectivizing with them, looking after them, taking care of them, understand, there's a mutual understanding that we all share in being Black and in understanding what racism and oppression feels like and looks like in its multiple facets. Again, racism isn't just the outward, expletives or whatever words you want to use. It's microaggressions. It's on a large scale. And again, also finding solidarity and strength in your Blackness. So a lot of the time I say this, within my work at MHFA England, outside of MHFA England, that standing strong in that, owning yourself. If my very existence, if one's existence bothers someone else, okay, that is what it is, but I can't change the color of my skin, and I'm not going to change who I am to fit the mold of white supremacy. So that's that really. But yeah, thank you both so much for your time. Before we end, I want to go straight to questions. So thank you for sharing the link, Kadra. Let me just copy that now. What I will do is I will go straight to Q&A, because we've actually received quite a few questions during the session. So please feel free to use the Q&A function. But yeah, so first question is, someone mentioned that it was very interesting what you shared, Kadra, about Somali Week, and they're asking, how do we honour Black history and culture for all, as you say, the Somali, Sudanese, Caribbean, etc. communities?
Yeah, definitely. My point was that, yeah, we should definitely be like acknowledging all those communities. And one way that I think actually there's been sort of like growing celebration and events to mark Independence Days. Most of us, sadly, Black countries and communities have been colonized at one point, not with I think the exception of Ethiopia, maybe. So I think like thinking about Independence Days as a moment to kind of like mark and honor different Black communities within the UK. I know there's like lots of schools, for example, doing things for like Nigeria Independence Day and things like that. That's a great opportunity for those students to kind of be seen, celebrated, can share their sort of culture and identity with their peers. We can do this in workspaces. However, I did hear that somebody got told off for bringing like their flag, decorating their work desk with their flag in the office. So that's quite interesting. But there's those kind of opportunities, and yeah, I think putting more sort of resource and intention and planning behind that really.
Fantastic, thank you for that, Kadra. Matt, there was a question for you. So someone asked, the racism from football is off the scale. I feel that it's become worse over the years rather than better. What do you feel has driven this, and how do we eradicate it?
Okay, I think racism did you say from the fans?
Let me have the questions again. Yeah, from football fans.
So racism from the fans' point of view and the terraces, I'd argue whether that's the content of it is getting better or worse. I think the content of what is said and done in the stands is actually getting better. You speak to my dad back in the day, and some of the stuff that he had to go through and some of the older players went through. I think now pales in significance to what they used to do, what they used to have to put up with. My dad told me some stories that were terrible. I think the difference now is that everybody has 24-hour access to everybody. You mentioned earlier about the footballer that had the I think it was an Instagram or something along them sort of that was sent to him, and he put it out. Good on him. Anybody that sends anything via Instagram, Twitter, anything like that should be outed. And I think the social media companies have a lot to answer for, because I work in IT. This is not difficult to stop, and I don't understand why there's not more being done to stop people having access to these players. And they have a bad day at work, or they watch the game and they lose, or the player scores against them, so they can go online and call them every name under the sun. That's just that's definitely not got better. That's a lot worse. I think having access to these players and being able to do it anonymously, I think is the thing that is, because you don't know who you're talking to on Instagram. It could be anyone. Anyone can make up a profile, and I'm one of these. I hate social media. I hate Instagram. It's not something that I enjoy. It could, it's been one of those things that's caused me grief. Even when I was a CEO, I had things sent to me. I never put them out there. I probably should. I wish I had done. I wish I had put some of the things out that I've been called over the years. And but just to answer the question, I think the content, I think what people are saying and how they're saying it, and the viciousness of it, from what I know, is a little bit better. But I do believe that the accessibility to these people makes it more. And I think you're going to find out a lot. It's going to keep happening until the social media companies decide that enough's enough from that point of view. Yeah,
thank you for that, Matt. So another question that has come in is, oh no, it was a comment. Okay, someone shared, all babies are born with no racism, and to me, our frame of reference and how we are raised then influences others. And unfortunately, there is still racism on every street corner. I'm white, but my husband is Muslim, and the indirect abuse was horrendous. Again, I think that's been echoed in some capacity with each of our experiences with racism, and it's yeah, I think the same rhetoric applies. It's having that extra knowledge, but also that collectivization, people being able to call out said indirect acts of racism. Did any of you have anything to add to that statement at all?
Well, in all fairness, it's correct. Nobody's born racist. That's just not how it is. You are affected by your surroundings and the people you were brought up with. So if we can help those surroundings by introducing our culture and our positivity towards our culture, you're hoping that this would make a difference in the future. Definitely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, totally agree with what you both said. I would just say that some of us, however, are born experiencing racism already, if you see what I mean. So if you think about like some of the disparities we see around like maternal mental health, for example, and the fact that like Black babies, because of experiences of intergenerational racism and trauma, are automatically born with like high levels of cortisol, which is like your stress hormone. So although like people might not be born with racism, some of us are just born already affected by racism, unfortunately. So that point you both kind of raised around tackling this intergenerationally is important, and especially like the early years is the time that the brain is like more malleable and influenced by our surroundings. So yeah, it's an important point, really.
Definitely. Thank you, Kadra. I think you've somewhat answered this, but another question that came in was, what can we do to protect children and safeguard them against racism to prevent childhood trauma and it affecting them in the long term?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know specifically like in what role or capacity the person's asking the question, but obviously if you're like a practitioner, there's like lots of really fantastic training and awareness sort of programs available. And I think the point they made is really key, because there's a lot of conversations around like childhood trauma, but sometimes people don't really recognize racism as a form of childhood trauma. So that recognition itself is like a really important step. And I think from my perspective, if Black children and Black parents have to have the talk with a Black child about the world and like working twice as hard and racism and all of these things that a lot of us experience, then I think white children also should have an equivalent conversation with their families and schools. There's really great like information and stuff out there. For example, the School That Tried to End Racism, that was a really great program that I think came out in 2020 or 2021, and they kind of like had the intercultural sort of like conversation about racism in schools and have great resources on the Channel 4 website. And then also Anna Freud Center, they've got really great resources around how to support young people and children impacted by racism, which they co-developed with a number of Black charities. So I'd recommend that.
Fantastic, thank you. Matt, you were gonna say something?
No, I was just gonna say something, but it wasn't as eloquent as Kadra. I guess how to protect them. My dad's version was sticks and stones, wasn't it? That's how he thought I could protect myself and he could protect me by maybe making me a little bit more resilient to it. Now that doesn't mean that that's the best way to protect people, but unfortunately, I don't think this is going away very quickly. So we have to be able to maybe understand it and protect our own mental health a little bit better as well.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Matt. I've got one final question, but a couple of people have just said thank you so much for being in the space. They've enjoyed the webinar. Yeah, they've enjoyed it, so just saying thank you. And then the final question, which is, what would you say is the most common form of well-meaning racism you see in white people you know? Do you have any advice on what we can do to avoid perpetuating it? I really have my own thoughts, but I wanted to get you both to just sort of jump in. And
well-meaning racism.
So I believe, again, the person can clarify what they mean, but from what I understood was racism, like with you know, like indirect racism, so like microaggressions that are meant like with good intention. So if someone says to you, oh, you speak really, really well for a black girl, which I've had many times, or where are you really from? So those type of well-meaning racisms.
Oh, okay. I haven't got a view on that. I've never, you know what, I've not really heard that saying before. So it's kind of stumped me a little bit, that one. I understand what you're saying, but I don't feel like there's any well-meaning racism. I feel like they're all having affected a certain way. And I think, you know, whether it's a stereotype or whether it's something else, for me, it's all the same, really. You know, it's all something we've had to deal with at some point in our life, whether it be positive or negative. I don't suppose there is any positives, but you know, yeah, it's not for me, this one. This sounds like a Kadra question.
No, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And you can take it down many different sort of like paths, really. I think the first sort of thought that came to mind for me is like looking at like the difference between like cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation. And that's quite interesting. And like sometimes, you know, there's ways of like, for example, I don't know, if you were going to like Ghana Independence Day, you don't have to like go to Ghana Independence Day and start you know, dressing up Ghanaian and all of this stuff, and you thinking that's a way of like celebration, and it's like, that's a little bit kind of racist in a way. So I think, you know, just having those sort of conversations, there are ways of like connecting with different cultures and communities without trying to look like them, act like them. And basically it's kind of like cosplaying a different sort of like identity in a way. Like, you know, you can admire different cultures and communities without trying to take over and speak up over people. So, you know, just being really genuine and authentic and having meaningful relationships with people from lots of different communities is the way to go, I would say.
It's a really good question, though. It's a really good question, that one.
Yeah, really good question. Thank you for whoever sent that in. But yeah, I think that concludes our session today with 3 minutes to spare. I'm just going to quickly share the slideshow. I hope you can see this. Someone said, thank you all so much, lots to share and welcome with colleagues and myself. Thank you very much. So moving on very quickly in terms of resources to support yourselves in your anti-racism journey. Again, we'll try and figure out how we can make these accessible to all of you, but we have different mental health, specialised mental health services such as not we MHFA England, but different that you can access. So Black Minds Matter, Black Thrive, UK Black Pride, the Black, African and Asian Therapy Network. In terms of further resources, aside from what Kadra has also shared, we have our My Whole Self toolkit. We have our guidance on how to support Black people and people of colour in the workplace, our race equity impact report as such. I'm speeding through, apologies. You can watch back the recording if necessary. And finally, for any questions, concerns, worries, feedback, you have our race equity inbox here. You can feel free to tag us on social media with today's session at MHFA England across all platforms. But again, a huge thank you to both Kadra and Matt for your expertise, your time. It's been a wonderful, wonderful session. I've enjoyed it. I hope that those of you who have listened in have enjoyed it also. For IMs, instructor members, recordings will be made available on the online learning hub. For those, because it's a web that's been open to the general public, we'll figure out how we can do that for those that weren't able to access it online. But without further ado, I'm going to stop recording and say goodbye to you all. So yeah, 1 minute to spare. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of Black History.